Buckle up for today's 3 stories of people that went missing in bizarre circumstances. 2 of these stories will leave you in shock and disgust, but one of them will leave your jaw on the ground. Without further ado, here we go. The Frommer's Traveler Guidebooks were a type of book that you would bring with you while traveling to a new city, and it would give you outlines of historical events that had taken place, attractions that you can see, and sightseeing opportunities. But with the invention of the internet, GPS and travel sites were available on your cell phones, and with that, travel manuals just like Frommer's would be nearly extinct. But in the year 2000, cell phones with strong internet capability were not mainstream yet. And in May of that year, Frommer's had a 29-year-old adventurous guidebook editor by the name of Claudia Kirschoch. Claudia was known by her friends and family as a bright and bubbly woman that loved books and poetry, and she played violin. But to a greater extent, she loved to travel. So much so that she actually lived in France for a year just to see what it was like there. Travel was one of the reasons why Claudia accepted the Frommer's job, because writing about beautiful places felt more like pleasure than a job itself, even if she rarely got to leave the New York office. That May, several of the editors had to step down from a work-sponsored trip to the New Sandals Resort in Havana, Cuba. And in their place, Claudia would be offered the role, which she happily accepted. So on May 23rd, Claudia would pack her bags and make for the airport, where she would be the first of her coworkers to arrive. But after some time, the rest would arrive, and together they would board the plane en route to a connecting destination in Montego Bay, Jamaica. The expectation is that they would catch that flight, then to Havana after Jamaica. Upon arrival to the airport, the group would make their way to their new plane, which would have the destination of Havana, but the writers were denied access and sat in the airport terminal as they watched their plane back away, taxi out to the runway, and leave without them. Realizing that their trip to the Sandals Resort just wasn't going to happen, they went to the front desk to inquire about a return flight to New York. They would wait in the airport terminal all day trying to find out if there was a return flight back to New York City. But by the following morning, they found out all flights were booked out for that day, the next day, all the way up through June 1st. So Claudia, along with her 63-year-old travel partner, Tanya, looked at each other and must have thought, we're stuck in Jamaica for 7 days. Things could be worse. They would have to wait in the airport for an additional day before Sandals would apologize for the mix-up, and on the 25th, they transferred the 2 ladies to their resort on the western side of Jamaica, which was about 45 miles away. The 2 would make for their room, they would drop their bags off, change into something more comfortable, and make their way down to the bar for dinner and drinks. They were in no rush, so they sat and discussed work and life while they ate and had plenty of drinks. Claudia, though, was obviously distracted as she was flirting with the bartender, a man by the name of Anthony. As the night would get later, Tanya started to feel her drink and opted to crash out for the night. So she said goodbye to Claudia, told Anthony it was nice to meet him, and made for her room. Claudia, though, after being cooped up in an airport terminal for 2 days, didn't really want to go to bed, so she would remain at the bar, have more drinks, and socialize, and flirt with Anthony. The following morning, which was the 26th, Claudia and Tanya would have a rather uneventful day around the resort. At one point, Claudia would confide in Tanya that she had a lot of fun with Anthony the night before. After closing the bar down, they walked the beach and at one point went skinny dipping in the ocean. Again, near dinner time that night, the ladies would go their separate ways. Tanya was tired from a long day and retired back to her room, while Claudia had other plans again. She was intrigued by this Anthony fella and made dinner plans with him, but the rest of their evening is undocumented. The following morning at 8 a.m., Tanya would receive word from her travel agent that a flight was available to New York, which she quickly accepted. She would get a hold of Claudia and let her know of the travel plans, at which point the 2 ladies would go out for breakfast, say goodbye, and Tanya would depart for her flight. Tanya made her way to the airport through security, which in the year 2000 was much faster than it is today, boarded her plane, and left Jamaica. Claudia, on the other hand, would never leave Jamaica. That afternoon, she went for a walk on the beach in her bathing suit, t-shirt, and had a portable radio in hand. And at some point during this walk, Claudia would step away from the water toward the parallel road and then disappeared. A resort lifeguard would be the last person to see Claudia alive as she was walking along the beach shortly before she disappeared. On June 2nd, so 6 days after Claudia was seen walking on the beach, her parents knew that she should have arrived in town the night prior, but they were unable to reach her. And after calling the Frommer's office, they found that she had never reported to work. Understandably, this news was very upsetting to the family, and they called the police to report her missing. And given the international nature, the FBI was assigned to the case, and the search for Claudia would begin. And in a very, very unfortunate series of events, the FBI would call the hotel and request them to check on her room, which was 621. And when hotel staff were to enter her room, they would find passports and money, jewelry, clothes. They found a camera and a mobile phone along with her return plane ticket. They were all accounted for. The only items that were missing were her t-shirt, bathing suit, and the radio. But her room was contaminated when hotel staff moved her possessions to the main office, cleaned the room, and rebooked it out for another visitor. Realizing that they had a potential crime on their hand, the FBI agents would fly down to Jamaica and investigate the hotel, looking deeper for any trace of Claudia. At some point along the investigation, Claudia's cell phone would go missing from the hotel office, and when FBI agents requested the cell phone, they were unable to provide it. Along with that, they requested the hotel logbook, which would contain license plates for all the visitors. They found that too had disappeared. FBI agents were very frustrated with the hotel's lack of attentiveness to this case and asked for CCTV footage of the parking lot to identify potential suspects. The cameras over the parking lot should be able to identify cars driving in and out of the parking lot. But either due to malice or an accident, the cameras were recorded over, and all of the old footage was rendered useless. The resort also took the uninstructed initiative to develop the film that was in Claudia's camera, at which point they told the FBI that there was nothing on it. So in a bizarre sequence of events, the hotel had destroyed her cell phone, the visitor guest logbook, closed circuit camera system that would record the parking lot, along with her camera that would have any pictures that she might have taken on her last days. Anthony had been identified as a person that was close to Claudia throughout her last days, so agents wanted to sit down with him and know more about his potential role in this. He initially denied ever knowing Claudia, but that would quickly change and he would later admit that he went on a date with her and the two were romantically involved. The police and the FBI would use his off-putting demeanor along with his misinformation as probable cause and investigated Anthony more. And in an odd twist, they would find that he called off work for 4 days after she went missing. Given this information, they obtained a search warrant for his home and his car. Canine dogs would find Claudia's scent in his house along with the backseat of his car and his trunk. Along with her scent, they found Claudia's hair in his car, a pair of boots, gloves, and a knife in his trunk. But nothing more would be found in his back seat as Anthony had changed his seat covers recently. Following an inconclusive polygraph test, Anthony would acquire a lawyer and refused any more questions from the police, and police eventually removed him as a suspect in the case. Claudia Kirschoch would be legally pronounced dead in 2002, and sadly no one has ever been held accountable for her disappearance. The State Police of Vermont would be created in response to this college girl that set out for a walk. On December 1st, 1946, Paula Weldon was a sophomore at Bennington College in Bennington, Vermont. She was majoring in art. On this day, she was just finishing up her breakfast and lunch shift at the college's dining hall where she worked. Upon finishing her shift, she clocked out, said goodbye to some of her friends that she worked with, and made her way back to her dorms, which were the lady dormitories called Dewey Hall. When she walked into the dormitories and opened up her room, her roommate, Elizabeth Johnson, was there studying. Paula and Elizabeth would talk and study for a while before Paula decided to take a break, changed into comfortable clothes, and said she was going to go for a hike. So Paula said goodbye to Elizabeth and made her way out of the dorm at about 2:30 in the afternoon. She took a path down the driveway towards the edge of campus, but Paula didn't have a car and the trail that she was intending to hike was 8 miles away, so she hitchhiked her way to the trailhead. And at 2:45 she was picked up by Lewis Knapp, a passing motorist. He asked her where she was going, and she told him the long trail off Route 9 in Glastonbury Mountain. Mr. Knapp would agree that he was going in that general direction, and Paula got into his car. Knapp would then drop Paula off at 3:15 near his home, which was about 3 miles from the trailhead of where she was going, so she had made it 5 miles closer to her destination. Paula thanked him for the ride, got out of his car, and started walking towards the trail. Given the timeline, Paula must have received another ride from another passing motorist, as she had been seen at 4 o'clock that afternoon near the trailhead, which would have only given her 45 minutes to walk the 3 miles. She would be seen by 4 boys that were coming out of the trailhead at 4 p.m., and she asked them some general questions about the trail. How far back did it go, and was it difficult? And with 20 minutes of daylight left in the day, Paula would thank the boys for their information and continued into the trail as night fell. It would be the last time that Paula was ever seen. On the following day, Monday, she was expected in class, and when she didn't show, Mary Garrett, the director of admissions at Bennington College, called the state's attorney and Mr. Weldon, who would arrive that afternoon. Unsure of where Paula had even gone, there wasn't an immediate organized search. She had not told her roommate which trailhead she was taking, she just said she was going for a walk. So instead, they put a broadcast across that evening's news along with photographs, and word of mouth spread around the city quickly. By the next day, Ernie would come forward as one of the boys that spoke with Paula near the trail and described how she asked for trail information, thanked him, and then left to walk down the trail. Mr. Weldon would immediately put together a group with flashlights in hand, and they combed the trail 20 feet at a time. They continued up the trail until they would reach a camp owned by Mr. William Lawson, which they woke him up in the middle of the night and asked if he had seen the girl, but he had not. Organized search groups would grow as the volunteers would step forth and help out. The superintendent of buildings and grounds at the college would oversee the search and rescue operations. Local hunters, Boy Scouts, college friends, the Green Mountain Club, helicopters, locals, and Robert Woodworth, which was Paula's professor, would all join in the search looking for the missing girl. One of the problems that they had was Paula was 5'5" and 123 pounds with blonde hair and blue eyes. It was not an uncommon look for the time, and as a result, when locals were asked if they saw her, several reported that they had, ranging from sightings in restaurants to bus stops, one at a train stop as far as New York, where a girl matching her description punched a ticket towards Charlotte, North Carolina. More than 600 people scoured the mountainside and the entire city looking for Paula, and the search would continue for 15 days until weather had deteriorated and the search was halted. A silver lining to Paula's disappearance was the need for a state police, and as a result, the Vermont State Police would be created just a year later. Unfortunately, even though the trail that she was hiking was fairly straight, to this day, no jacket, shoes, hat, or any trace of Paula has ever been found. And in 1970, Mr. Weldon would pass away unknowing what happened to his daughter. The area where Paula disappeared is referred to as the Bennington Triangle, and it has been responsible for many mysterious disappearances over the years. Since the year 2000, there have been more than 200 documented cases of people going missing on cruise ships, and 90% of those cases remain unsolved forever. 24-year-old Rebecca Coriam is described by her friends as a warm-hearted, happy-go-lucky, and energetic person from England. And given her job, she needed to be. Rebecca worked for Disney. I do have to warn you, due to the company involved in this story, many of the details have never been released by the company, and therefore are unknown or have to be speculated. I did my best efforts to lay out the facts to the case and let you decide for yourself. On March 21st, 2011, Rebecca was aboard the Disney Wonder cruise ship sailing from Los Angeles to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico. The following morning, she was scheduled to work at 9 a.m., but when she missed her shift, several of her coworkers went looking for her. They approached her room, knocked a few times on the door without a response, so they went to the crew deck on the 5th floor to look for her there. When she wasn't found there, they reported her to the captain of the ship, which would announce over the PA system, "Rebecca, report to the crew quarters." Again though, she would not respond, and now the crew was getting much more concerned about where she was at. Security would go to review the camera footage while more people would scour the ship looking for her. Disney cruise ships are touted to be some of the most technologically advanced cruise ships. Their closed-circuit camera systems include hidden cameras and audio recording devices throughout their ship. Crews have previously stated that it feels impossible to find any part of the ship where they're not being watched or recorded. Early on in the search for Rebecca, one of their crewmates would make a statement that she went overboard at 3 a.m. But after further investigation was done and the closed-circuit footage was reviewed, it would later find out that Rebecca was alive at 5:45 a.m. That crewmate was never reinvestigated as to why they made that statement. Staff did feel a little bit better about the situation after the cameras showed Rebecca talking on an internal phone at 5:45. She hung it up and ran her hands through her hair and then started to walk away. On the video, a man approached Rebecca and asked her if she was okay, which you could read from her lips when she said, "Yeah, I'm fine," and then she walked out of frame. All phone calls made from a Disney ship, whether internal or external, are recorded, so it should be very easy to find out who the other person on the line was, question them, and hopefully identify where Rebecca went. By this time, several hours had passed since crewmates knocked on her door, and Disney reached out to her parents to notify them that their daughter was missing. Obviously panicked by the news, they made arrangements to travel from England, her hometown, to California. Now, for this part of the story, I think it's important to discuss how cruise ships operate. That way you know the hurdles that her parents had to go through to overcome and get answers. Almost all cruise ships operate out of what's called a flag of convenience, which means that they claim their home port as whichever country has the most favorable tax laws. In this case, Disney, which owns 2 of the largest theme parks in the United States, operates their cruise ships out of the Bahamas. Doing this allows them to pay no taxes to the United States and very little taxes to the Bahamas, saving them potentially millions of dollars. But the problem with this is that because the crime potentially happened in international waters and the home port is not the United States, the disappearance, and if there was a crime, would have to be investigated by the Royal Bahamas Police Force. And when notified of the missing persons, they sent out an investigator to the cruise ship. A few days later, when Mike and Anna Marie Coriam, Rebecca's parents, would arrive in California, they would meet with the Bahamian investigator. He had just finished a one-day investigation where Disney had reported to him that Rebecca was swept overboard by a rogue wave from the crew deck. After her parents had met with the Disney staff, they were escorted to the ship through a car with blacked out windows and arrived on the back side of the ship and escorted through a side entrance. They would later go on to say that it was a very peculiar situation and the process felt very secretive. The ship's captain would provide condolences to the family and notified them that their daughter was swept overboard from the 5th deck by a rogue wave. The 5th deck was the deck for crewmates. Disney would then put a flower wreath out near the area where she was last seen, packaged up Rebecca's things from her cabin, and gave them back to her family. In the belongings was a single flip-flop sandal that Disney claimed was in her room. But this is where the story would fall apart. The Coriams would hire their own private investigator, and what they found muddies the Disney's position substantially. He found that late into the night, Rebecca would be in the company of 2 others, a man and a woman, whom also worked for Disney. The trio would be intermittently romantically involved that evening, and the female would leave the room several times. In an attempt to better understand the story, he went undercover on the cruise ship and quietly interviewed staff. One woman claimed that the flower wreath was off-putting because nothing had been determined on board the ship yet, so putting a wreath up felt rushed. He also observed the crew's pool area where the captain claimed that Rebecca had disappeared from because of that rogue wave. And he noted that the steel walls were above eye level and it would be nearly impossible for someone to be struck by a wave, let alone struck and then carried over the sides. In conjunction to that, evidence gathered from meteorologists would determine that seas were normal that day, and with hundreds of measuring buoys, the area had no rogue waves identified. Also, if a rogue wave was large enough to hit the 5th floor, the cruise floor of the Disney Wonder, the ship would have visible damage to the outside of it. On his final day aboard the ship, he would interview a man from security, and he stated that Disney knows exactly what happened. They have every inch of the ship on camera and every conversation recorded. A few theories for Rebecca's disappearance have come forth. One of them is that she could have gone to the pool area to relax, climbed up on top of the wall, she was known to be a risk taker, and potentially fallen overboard. Also, though, the evidence that was in her room was fabricated. She had never been seen wearing those sandals before, and Rebecca had larger feet and the sandals were too small for her to wear, which in 2016, other private investigators would conclusively determine that the sandals that were in her room did not belong to her. British investigator Matheson believes that Coriam was a victim of a crime, potentially sexual assault, murder, or both. And in recent years, Baron John Prescott and the former Prime Minister Tony Blair have taken note of the case, and they've pushed for regulations to allow British investigators to investigate their own citizens when crimes occur in international waters. Rebecca is just one case of more than 200 that have never been solved from international waters. Thank you everybody for staying this long. I appreciate you watching, and if there's any stories that you know of, please throw them in the comments below. Again, thank you so much, and I will see you next time.